between those two data sets. So here we're just iterating through the different sample values for the historic on the one hand and the current on the other, taking the difference. And here it's adding the absolute value. So that's actually a mathematically different way of measuring differences than the Euclidean distance, and it's also less general. The newest version of AnyLogic is a more general way of doing it that allows for interpolation. So, in other words, the historic data may have been measured less frequently than the data you have coming from the model, but you can still take the difference, okay? And hence this built-in function difference. But question? No?
How would you look up what the actual function is for the updating you're using?
Okay, so what I do, and let me know if I'm not answering your question here, okay? So in other words, I would go here and the first thing I would do to find out some information is I would call up this. You'll notice, by the way, there's several of those with that two with that name, and this is what's called an overloading of the function. In other words, different from overriding, which is another term we'll get to in subclassing. This is an overloaded function. In other words, there's different versions of functions which take different methods, or excuse me, different arguments here, different parameters. So this one, for example, operates in two data sets. This one operates on a data set and a table function. Okay, the top one. This is operating on two data sets. So if I wanted to find out about that, well, my first recourse would be to do this autocomplete. I would select it here, and then I would go browse over here and read about it here. Now, if I want to find out potentially more information or read about it in the context, what I would do is I would go to help and go to AnyLogic help, and I would go down to this API reference, and you can actually search for it here, but something like difference is just so helpful because it's going to occur in a lot of places. I mean, if I search for difference here, what I probably find is, Laplace, log normal, altering parameter, all these things have nothing to do with that because difference has other connotations too. It's such a colloquial term. So what I would do is, again, go back to the table of contents, and then I would go to the API reference here, go to engine, and scroll down here, since this is something to do with agents and so on rather than something to do with the analysis function. And you could scroll down to agent here, for example. And here's all the information about agent. And I believe this is defined, okay, so it's a good question. Is this defined in agent or is it defined in an active object? This is actually a very good question. So let me, oh, utilities, okay, yeah, you're probably right then. So let's go see. If I scroll down here for utilities, is that, yeah, there we are, utilities. And this is sort of a grab bag, I think, of different things. I could search for it here and find difference, and then there's a bunch of things that involve difference in date units, yeah. Difference, there we are. Difference function, which is always negative and reflects. Correct. Because the AnyLogic library it's a jar file like we talked about last time. It's a bunch of class files, and you don't generally have recourse to the code there. Now, that has pluses and minuses. On the plus side, what it allows them to do is to make code more and more efficient over time without worry that you're counting on some obscure property of it. Right. Basically, this is all you're promised. You don't know how it's implemented, so they can go and modify the implementation. On the downside, if this specification isn't clear enough for you, or if you're encountering an error and you don't know why, you don't have recourse to kind of go and see what's going on. So there's some real trade-offs there. Having recourse to the code as a last resort is often desirable, but it can inhibit evolution of that code base, because who knows what you may be counting on about the obscure operations of the code that they may not want to promise in the future. Okay, so in short, no, you have to reference sort of this information here. Okay, it's a good question. So as I was saying, we can use a built-in one like this difference function, or we could define our own. Either is an option. Here it's actually defined differently using absolute value of the differences, and that provides an example. Any question about that before I go on to look at how this particular example works for defining like historic data? Question? Okay. Okay, so let's go see how